Okay, wasn't really expecting to wake up to this bit of news, but we finally got a bunch of new info, details, and some honest to goodness gameplay for Chrono Odyssey. And you know what? It's looking surprisingly pretty good, which I really wasn't expecting. So let's dive in. All right, so a bulk of the info here today comes from a developer interview where they shared, like I said, a bunch of new details. Here's exactly what we learned. Starting with some basic info about the general setting and story of the game. So they say that the world is not a typical fantasy setting, rather it's an eerie, imposing world that evokes a sense of dread and wonder. They drew inspiration from the cosmic horror vibe of Prometheus, as well as trying to instill fear of this like encroaching threat to humanity, similar to the Zerg and StarCraft. You know, those are some inspirations that I can get down with. Nice. And in terms of the like game space itself, well, they say that the game's world is a blend of reality along with these other dimensions. The world will be a mix of natural environments with places like lakes, forest, and mountain ranges, but then throughout the world are these massive otherworldly entities that defy logic, and this mixing of realistic and otherworldly environments is supposed to blend the familiar and unfamiliar, where some structures that may appear man-made but are most certainly not. But that's enough about the story and setting and stuff. Let's talk about some actual gameplay mechanics and interesting systems and features. So first off, with the time manipulation, it's got Chrono in the title. The time altering things and jumping between dimensions plays a big role. Here's how we can expect some of that to actually surface within the game itself. So the developer said many people believed that incorporating space-time manipulation into an MMORPG was impossible, but we brought it to life with this system called the Chronotector. So with the Chronotector, which is like a physical object that you will acquire in the game, players can trade remnants of the past or catch glimpses of the future. So while you go about navigating the space, you'll investigate ruins, and in such you can manipulate time to reveal hidden paths or reconstruct moments to discover entirely new routes for you to traverse. Now, beyond using it to like push through and unlock new story and routes and stuff like that, outside of just navigating the world, it also actually has some combat relevant abilities. In fact, on their Discord in an FAQ, they gave a description of how this is going to work. So players are going to have access to ability known as time reversal with the Chronotector, and they said what this does is records a specific point in space-time, allowing the caster to revert to that exact state. And this actually sounds a lot like one of the mage abilities. I actually think it's called reverse time or something, where basically you activate it and then 5 seconds later you'll be brought back to that location, the health, the mana, the resources, whatever you had at that time. And it's a great thing that you can do before you anticipate taking some damage, or if you're trying to like juke NPCs or other players in PvP. There's a lot of fun systems and mechanics you can do this without actually like freezing time and then as such freezing the play space for all other players around you. I think another thing they could potentially do is have some sort of time warp locations, like a bubble in which time slows down. So like it slows down projectiles or freezes enemies in place. There's definitely a lot of like time themed things you could do in a multiplayer game in an MMO that isn't just like freezing the entire open world for all other players so that the one player can do the things. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can do time manipulation in multiplayer, but then obviously if they have any instant single player areas, they can lean more into this time manipulation because it won't matter. You can like freeze time for all of the 100 NPCs around you. If it's not freezing other players, it's really not a big deal. Pretty cool stuff. Again, lots of potential. Something else that's pretty cool is today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Game of Thrones King's Road, the official action-adventure RPG based on the TV series and A Song of Ice and Fire novels. The game introduces a brand new story that expands the world of Westeros with thrilling combat, political intrigue, and deep character progression. In King's Road, you'll explore the Seven Kingdoms with an immersive open world, roaming vibrant cities, untamed landscapes, and hidden towns filled with unique quests, challenges, and characters. It's got what they call manual ARPG combat that emphasizes skillful play and strategic action, where you'll be dodging incoming attacks and countering with your own. There are multiple playable characters, each with unique actions, weapons, and a wide range of skills. It is class-based, where you'll be choosing from the Knight, Sellsword, and Assassin. The game features a multiplayer mode called Altar of Memories, where players team up to battle powerful monsters such as the Ice Spiders, Stormhorn Unicorns, and Ironbeak Griffins. weapons, just to name a few. And the game was developed for both PC and mobile, supporting seamless cross-play and cross-progression. If you would like to learn more and check out Game of Thrones King's Road for yourself, the game is currently available. You can learn more using the link in the video description below. All right, back to the Chrono Odyssey update. So next up, I want to talk about what to expect from the scale of content in this game. So one thing that they highlighted pretty early on was the fact that even though Chrono Odyssey is an open world MMO, a lot of the content that they're building for is aimed at smaller scale play. So they say that players are going to start out solo or in small groups, gradually expanding their party over time or coming across content that requires bigger groups of players. But even when you reach max level, the game encourages people stick with 5-man parties. This isn't a game where you're going to expect to get like 40 or 100 player raids taking on massive bosses with a large group. Instead, it's a lot of smaller group content. Now, there will be content that requires multiple groups of players to work together in order to take it down, which we're going to cover here in a moment. It's just you're not all going to be in one massive party. So this is an open world MMORPG. You are going to see other players running around, but no, this isn't like 1,000 versus 1,000 guild versus guild battles. That's not what they're aiming to deliver, and that's not the type of content they're going to be making. Something that I was actually really interested in is their discussion about leveling and progression. So I'll open up with this quote where they said, "When we began developing Chrono Odyssey, our goal was to make the overall progression just as enjoyable as the endgame content." And I think this is a really good decision and design philosophy to lead into, because frankly, the endgame, while it does possess the repeatable content that you do in MMOs, a lot of times it's the journey to get there that ends up being the most memorable, at least for me personally, in the genre. And the end game is when you start to kind of settle into the repetition of running the same types of content day after day, week after week, month after month. And even if you have a lot to offer, it still does get repetitive, but it's that first exploration and adventure, going through the leveling process, discovering the world, which really tends to cement a lot of good memories. So let's talk about what they plan to do here. So they said that rather than focusing on the competitive aspects of the genre, like rushing to max level, fighting over leaderboard rankings, guild territory, PvP wars, etc., they instead wanted to make an MMO where players are focusing on the exploration and discovery of the world, moving seamlessly without loading screens through their massive open world, doing things like wandering through the woods, cutting down trees, fishing, or teaming up to do some group dungeons or take on world bosses. They said that the degree of limitless adventure is something that's unique to MMOs, and they really want to highlight that with Chrono Odyssey. They also said that unlike many other MMOs that may focus, say, entirely on having a main story quest that forces all players to follow pretty much the exact same route from the start all the way to max level, they've said that Chrono Odyssey is going to have a lot of side content that you can use to level up instead. They went on to describe that how, like we talked about the Chrono Detector, it's going to let you reveal secrets in the environment, opening up new paths and stories, and what this will also mean is you can pick up new objectives in the process, accessing new areas full of enemies, completing tasks, and leveling up that way. They also mentioned the fact that most in-game activities will grant experience, and this even allows players to reach max level in a lot of ways, such as just by gathering and crafting. You can literally harvest resources, craft items, and go from the beginning all the way to max just doing that. They added, quote, "Traditional MMORPGs haven't always been friendly to players who prefer non-combat activities, but in Chrono Odyssey, we've built a system where players can progress through exploration and crafting while still benefiting from trading and sharing information with combat-oriented players." And this is something that I really appreciate. While I do like and in many cases want games to have some sort of main through line progression, I really like when they have the option for players to go off in a corner and AoE grind for a while, or go chop down a bunch of trees and turn it into lumber and then make a bunch of bow and arrows or something, or do some house crafting or whatever. I like having many different options on the path to progression. Now, obviously, for the min-maxers out there, there will inevitably be one quickest, fastest way from 0 to max, but I don't think they need to focus on those players. Just have a well-rounded experience that has a lot of options on offer for players who want to experience the game in different ways. I think that's probably the best way, in my opinion, to approach it. And while going through that process, they said that they've minimized in-game guidance to try to encourage curiosity and let players discover the world for themselves, which is something that I am also all in favor of. Less hand-holding, more open-ended exploration, and natural discovery by the player. That's what I really like. They added that they don't want combat to rely on skill numbers or HUD elements either, but rather focusing on the engagement. So similarly, not trying to handhold and let players focus on the game, be immersed in the action, and experience it that way rather than just following quest markers or literally auto-running like many modern MMOs let you do. All right, now let's talk about the different types of content and stuff you can see. They touched on a few of it in this interview. First up are what are called chrono gates. This is single-player content. These are 1v1 battles against powerful void apostles. Players must read enemy patterns and respond strategically, each encounter honing their skills and strengthening their character. These fights are supposed to be difficult and feel rewarding as a result, and I hate to say it, but watching some of the gameplay clips here, yes, this looks very Souls-like. I mean, it does. Just like look at these clips. It's very reading the animations, responding accordingly. They have a whole dodging and parrying as well, and a lot more interesting combat than I was expecting from this MMO, so like to see it. There's also another type of single-player content called Trials, where players traverse time and space, progressing through this vast tower with interconnected chambers, facing puzzles, traps, and randomized mechanics, creating new experiences with every run. There also look to be some combat rooms involved in places, but yes, this is a tower that you climb. This is a content type, a single-player content type that's been done in quite a few MMOs. Looks like it'll be in Chrono Odyssey as well. Expedition dungeons. These are 3-player parties where each player takes on a quote unique role, making teamwork essential. We've got region bosses, large field enemies, bosses found in the open world. These are referred to by the devs as guardians, and they say here that they will require multiple groups of players to take on. Defeating these bosses will earn you unique equipment. And going back to what I said earlier, doesn't look like we'll be forming 30 or 40 player parties. Instead, multiple parties of 5 players will have to coordinate in order to take these down, but coordinate separately. So I guess that means coordinate via Discord. Labyrinths. These are designed to give players a break from combat, referred to as a, quote, vast ever-shifting maze. They have you engaging in puzzle solving, traversal, and navigating obstacles. There are time portals found in select areas out in the open world that have you traveling back in time. Based on the footage they showed, this actually will change the surroundings to how it looked in another point. So you might walk up to a time portal in a serene open field with a bunch of butterflies and bunnies hopping around, and then you click on the time portal and all of a sudden you're surrounded by void monsters. That's the sort of thing that you can expect, like temporary phase shifting basically. And then when you're in those areas, you'll defeat unique enemies and bosses to gather special equipment and resources. And then lastly here, they mentioned having bounty hunting, which blends open world exploration with goal-oriented gameplay. And as it sounds, this basically gives you a list of different targets. You track them down, search for them in the open world, eliminate them, collect a reward. Now there was a brief mention of PvP, but they said rather than sticking to the conventional MMO large scale or arena PvP, they actually instead aim to deliver this unique, distinct PvEVP system. They didn't go into any elaboration as to what this would mean, but they did, while talking about this, they showed a clip in the background, and it looked to be a group of 3 players who were engaged in a boss fight, and then another group of rival players showed up that they started fighting. Now, what I'm curious about is if this is going to be the only form of PvP with the PvE hybrid, where you're taking on bosses or going through a dungeon and then other players come in and you have to rumble with them, or if they're also going to have the arena PvP or the battleground style PvP or something else. Really don't know, but they said they weren't sticking to the traditional MMO conventions with their PvP, so maybe this is in fact it. All right, now let's talk about a little bit about combat. They say with combat, they wanted to break away from people just playing the Holy Trinity. Instead, they want to let every player contribute in their own way, offering more flexibility in combat. They say that as they went through the development, they realized the need for hybrid classes to move beyond fixed roles and support with more flexible and varied playstyles. Above all, they wanted to make sure that if you were playing as a healer or if you were playing as a tank, you wouldn't struggle solo. So they do have strong damage variants for people who are also doing the healing and or the tanking. As we talked about earlier, and as you've probably seen in some of this footage, we do have parry and dodge mechanics, and this is going to make it so that it's not just the gear that matters, as properly timed timing attacks and dodges and parries will help you land damage and avoid getting hit beyond the stats of your character and your weapon and your armor. Combat also revolves around weapon swapping in lieu of skill chaining. You're going to be encouraged to swap between two weapons strategically during combat. Now, they were worried that this would be a little complicated at first, but believe that in the end it provides meaningful depth. And they also talk about the fact that early on, when you start out the game in the initial tutorial and beginning, you're going to be facing off against an elite boss where you only have one weapon available, and they say this is going to be a struggle due to the abilities cooldowns, and this is going to help kind of push players towards using the weapon swapping to make use of multiple tool sets. Weapon swapping also apparently grants passive buffs, letting you shift your setup in real time, each weapon featuring a distinct playstyle, so your playstyle will also change dramatically depending on which combination of weapons you choose. And lastly, in the combat section, they said that rather than going too overboard with the number of skills, they're making it so that every single skill is going to have a lot of different functions where it will change how it works depending on the context and the situation. All right, speaking of combat, let's talk about the classes. So we know about 6 classes that are going to be in the game thus far. There's the swordsman, the berserker, the ranger, the assassin, the paladin, and the sorceress. Now, as of now, they've revealed 3 different usable weapons for each of the classes. So the swordsman has the sword and shield, the broad blade, and the great blade. The berserker is chain blades, twin axes, battle axe. The ranger, bow, crossbow, rapier. The assassin's got the saber, wrist blades, and musket. Paladin has a mace, spear, and then lance and shield. And lastly, the sorceress has a spellbook, staff, and catalyst. We've seen some gameplay clips and some different abilities in action, but haven't gotten many descriptions on the abilities for each of these available weapons, although you can intuit some of it from the gameplay here. I also want to make note of an upcoming beta in which we're going to have access to the first 3 classes, those being the swordsman, berserker, and ranger, with the assassin, paladin, and sorceress coming at the full release. All right, progression system. So it looks like the game is going to be using the standard, tried and true, love it or hate it, gear leveling system of enhancement, where you're going to be taking a base piece of gear, spending resources to level it up, boosting its stats, and making it stronger in the process. Now, what I don't know is if they also plan to have the typical chance to fail mechanic as you get ever closer to the higher tiers of gear levels, although I'm going to assume so, especially with this direct quote where they said, "We have reduced the risks tied to enhancements, but even when progression slows, there will be other ways of growing stronger." So I do think they're going to have either a fail or a slow progression towards level like they do in Throne and Liberty. You know, I don't love this way of handling gear enhancement and gear powering up. I much prefer you get a piece of gear, maybe it's got an item level, and maybe you can enhance it somewhat by like enchanting it or putting gems in it or something. But this whole get a base piece of gear and then level it up 30 times, and as you get closer to level 30, it just keeps failing, and either you fail and you waste the resources and have to go grind more, or you fail and the gear D-levels, which is about the worst implementation. And the cherry on top is, of course, if any element of that gear leveling enhancing progression process is also tied into the monetization, which, speaking of monetization, when it comes to Chrono Odyssey, we have heard that they told investors in a investor conference call that they wouldn't be pay to win with this game as they're trying to appeal to a global audience. But boy, we have heard, hey, we won't be pay to win this time many times before. And I will make note of the fact that this game is being published by Kakao. And if you are at all familiar with MMORPGs from Kakao, you will know pay to win is just synonymous with these games for the most part. So believe it or not, there's actually a closed beta test for this game very soon. Next month, in fact. They revealed this recently with an announcement trailer a few days back. Now, they didn't have any actual specific day mentioned, just the fact that it will be taking place in June. So we're going to be getting our hands on this game very soon, it seems. Here's hoping it's fun. I mean, I guess we'll decide if it's even worth worrying about whatever business model they're going after and what sort of microtransactions they might have. First, we need to see if it's even fun to play. But yeah, we'll be finding out very soon. Now, of the test, they said here that their goal isn't to present a perfectly polished version of the game, but rather they're here to gather feedback from players and continue improving over time, specifically focused on the multiplayer experience. They also mentioned the fact that the beta is going to include the first few open world zones, and they're going to have a few different types of content. So for single player content, we're going to get the chrono gates and the trials to test out, and the party-based content is going to include things like the expedition dungeons as well as the region bosses. All right, like I said, I didn't wake up expecting to get a bunch of new details on Chrono Odyssey, but I'm happy we did. And frankly, from the little glimpses of gameplay that we got in there, this doesn't look bad. Now, I'm not holding my breath when it comes to how the progression system might be tied into the monetization. I suspect they will not stray very far from what Cacao games typically deliver, but I am open, as always, to being pleasantly surprised, and maybe Chrono Odyssey is the exception to the rule. We'll find out. At the very least, we're going to find out very soon if the game it plays well. June, beta test. We're getting our hands on this game sometime in the next 4 to 5 weeks. Awesome. Can't wait. Expect some future coverage from me. I'll definitely be diving in and checking this out. But that does it for today. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this update on Chrono Odyssey. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.